Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Auto Care Corner. I'm your host, John Manellis, and today's topic is going to be on the safety of braking. And the question is, what is the most impactful system on your car when it comes to stopping your vehicle? And it's probably not what you're thinking, your brakes. You must think I'm crazy, but stay tuned and I will explain it. Welcome back to the Auto Care Corner podcast. I'm your host, John Manellis. Thanks for tuning in. I wanted to build off of last week's show where we talked about the pothole issues in most of the country. Here in the Northeast, especially, we had pothole issues in the springtime. And if you want, go back and listen to that podcast. But what I wanted to talk about is some of the components that those potholes affected. And one of the major ones is your suspension, and specifically your shocks and your struts. And I wanted to talk to people about shocks and struts, educate them a little bit on how important they are to the vehicle, because it's one of those things that people don't think it has an effect on the vehicle, but it has a dramatic effect on how the vehicle handles and how it, more importantly, stops. And it's really a safety concern when shocks and struts get worn out. So um, I'm going to have, time to explain a little bit about when they wear out and how you should, what you should pay attention to know that they're wearing out. Because shocks and struts, those are one of those things that, they slowly become ineffective over time, and you don't really notice or perceive it because it happens so slow. So things to look out for, obviously, when you go over bumps, you hit you hit a bump and you hear a clunking noise. That's typically a worn out shock or strut. And I mean, shocks and struts have, basically a hydraulic piston that absorbs hydraulic fluid, and the fluid is there to, keep pressure on the piston so that it holds the um, vehicle's tire on the road. And so when it's in a bounce or a rebound type of condition, its job is to hold it in the opposite direction of the impact. So if you're going over a bump and the wheel's coming off the ground, the shock's trying to keep it on the ground. And so what happens when it wears out, and what happens is the wheel kind of comes off the ground and it bumps. And if the wheel is coming off the ground, water can get underneath it, and you'll have a condition where you don't have any grip on the road. And that's what causes um, spin outs and losing control of the vehicle. When you run your hand over your tire, you can feel little high and low spots. That's an indication that your tires are wearing because of worn suspension items, specifically worn struts and shocks. And that's because that wheel is just bouncing up and down off of the ground, causing those high and low spots. Most manufacturers of shocks and struts will tell you that the vehicle is the components wear out at around 50,000 miles. Our experience is pretty close to that with the vast amount of cars that we service. We see it about 60, thousand for shocks, and um, just a little bit more than that for struts typically. Um, but again, a good rule of thumb is at 50,000 miles, you definitely have worn components. At 60,000, they're pretty much end of life. So you want to be on top of that, because again, we a few years back we went on a ride and drive test over at the Loudon Speedway, and it was profound. We got in three different vehicles. All three vehicles were equipped with brand new struts and shocks, and then we took them out and put the original ones back in that had 60,000 miles on them, or 50,000, I think it was. Anyway, it makes a huge difference in stopping distances. And what we found, on average, between the different drivers using the same equipment, the same drivers, um, from 40 miles per hour with one suspension, it took an extra 12 feet to stop your vehicle. And from 70 miles an hour, it took an extra 22 feet. That is a considerable difference between crashing and not crashing, or running somebody over, God forbid. So again, these things almost imperceptible to the driver because it creeps up on them slowly, and they don't start to pay attention until they're blown out, um, and they hit a bump and they hear a clunking noise, and that clunking noise is doing damage to other components in your vehicle. Not to mention wearing out your tires prematurely. Struts that are worn like that, where they skull up the tires in high and low spots, those, that can happen in less than 2,000 miles. So if you put a new set of tires on and you have, worn shocks and struts, you are going to ruin those tires in a short period of time, and an alignment isn't going to help. It's strictly one components that need to be replaced, and a lot of times people will, wait for their mechanic to maybe catch a leak, and certainly if it's leaking, it's no good, and it needs to be replaced. And you got to replace them in pairs. You can't just replace one side, and you want stability, you want balance in the vehicle. So they're sold in pairs. We replace them in pairs, and if you can, I mean, it's not a cheap job, but if you can, I would do all four corners at the same time to restore the vehicle back to the way it was engineered to run. And the reason for that is, remember that if you replace just the fronts or just the rears, depending on the condition of the other set, you're going to be out of balance again. And that's what we're trying to prevent here, is because the vehicle can squat or nosedive, if you will. The back end is going to come off the ground, and the front end is going to do a nosedive, and that is, what affects your stopping distances. So do them all at the same time. Keep everything balanced. Thank you again for tuning into another episode of Auto Care Corner. And if you enjoyed the episode and you found it helpful, and you know anybody who you think it might serve, please do feel free to share it. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next Auto Care Corner.